Okay, so it feels like we're moving really quick, but I promise you it's going to come together. I probably shouldn't promise, but I'm pretty confident that we're going to get to the cultural part, and I want to give a lot of time for that. So holding on to the case conceptualization, those wonderings maybe that you have, okay, what's missing, what's not, what stood out to you. We're going to now kind of bring in another piece of the theoretical lens, right? So let's look at how theory can help facilitate this discussion about cultural identity in case conceptualization. So relational cultural theory is one that I borrow from. I like to say I borrow from a lot of theories, but as an educator, I know how important it is sometimes to just pick one so that we can have something to focus on. So this is, again, not the end all be all. This is one that I found really helps with this idea of me coming into the room as well, my cultural identities. And so this idea that as we're working with clients, who we are, right? This builds off of the thinking of neural connections, right? How our histories live in our bodies. And therefore, right, when I'm interacting with a client, via screen or in person, there's still going to be an exchange. And so this idea that within the counseling dynamic, within that therapeutic rapport building, there's this exchange. And if I'm aware of who I am culturally, and then my client, right, that kind of relationship has a different lens and a viewpoint. So I like this theory because it kind of builds on bringing in this kind of idea of mutual empathy and recognizing power imbalances. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here soon. And then I think it helps guide towards self-reflection. And really the main component I want to build towards is how and in what way do we responsibly bring ourselves into the room, right? And so I think that is one of those ways that we do that, recognizing any power, privilege, things like that, that are kind of all there, right? We don't have to add judgment to it, but it's just knowing that it's present. And for us in the clinician role, right, understanding how that might impact the counseling relationship. And so really just taking ownership of our role and sitting with what we need to, sitting with ourselves and all that can come with that so that we can sit with the client. So I kind of put some whole things. This is like my whole soapbox. I won't go on, but kind of, right, like we can't remove ourselves from the room. Recognize one of our tasks is to listen, but also recognize our impact on the client. So all of this, to me, within certain theoretical lenses, being aware of the space that it gives you to move in between these types of experiences, to make adjustments, to adapt to what your client needs. Because the impact, if we don't, can be tremendous, right? Really detrimental. I put here, let's not reenact oppressive roles by negligence and just not simply addressing or recognizing our connectedness in the counseling dynamic. So one of these is really just sitting with that awareness of who we are. And again, without judgment, hopefully that can open up space. I don't have to be wrong for who I am, but I have to recognize there might be some pre-set up kind of conditions that I didn't bring to the counseling relationship, but that exist. And the fun part is I get to work with, if you're a counseling intern or student, supervisor or someone else to help me navigate those spaces. Help me broach conversations responsibly is what I'll say, kind of not forcefully, because I've got this task in mind. I can be very task oriented. So I think of that of like, hey, I need to infuse cultural responsiveness with my clients. I'm going to go to all my clients and say, hey, right? Like that kind of, to me, is what I mean by doing it responsibly, making sure you've done the work to then now appropriately bring some of those things up, or at least handle if it were to be brought up. And that kind of ebbs and flows, right, based on your client needs, the treatment issue. And again, this whole idea of the case conceptualization that you're keeping in mind. But the big part is recognizing, okay, there might be an impact here. And have I accounted for that in my conceptualization of this client? So I usually like to tell a brief story about kind of a blind spot I had, and just a practical scenario that comes up for me was supervising another African-American woman. And I just assumed, right, like that this supervisee would just come to me with any issues. I don't know what I turned off, but I turned something off. And because it was just like, okay, yeah, okay, a Black woman, and we're going to connect. And if she struggles, she's going to reach out to me. I struggled to connect with her or for her to submit videos for me to review and give feedback. It was just really, there was something going on. And it really wasn't until the end, I think, why it stands with me so much is because of this blind spot potentially robbed the supervisee of me kind of really intervening sooner, because I was just assuming it was everything else, or I was just couldn't put my finger on it. But I never went to, what is this supervisee's experience with other Black women been? Right, that just didn't even come up with me. And so that was a situation where I feel like we had some on the surface kind of similar positionality and kind of cultural background, but still remain curious. So what I took from that, still remain curious. I'd learned a history of the previous two supervisors with Black women, just really hard on her and different things. And I should have gotten that history. And so this is not to perpetuate shooting on ourselves and things like that, but that story stands with me or sticks with me in this conversation of, we can have cultural blind spots. We can be so familiar that we stop being curious. And so I like this theoretical lens, because it, again, allows for this idea of what's happening in this exchange. And I think it can be applicable certainly to clinical supervision, right? We're still two individuals coming together with different life experiences. And what will make that supervision experience more fruitful if I haven't kind of even done a little bit of that conceptualization, as it were, even with understanding who's sitting in front of me, right? And to create a platform or a venue where that supervisee can bring issues like this, or can talk about clients that they're struggling with, right? And so that foundation really needs to be there. So I think of this theory, but then I'm curious about maybe what theory you have. And as you think about bringing in cultural identity and how it could be useful in a setting like clinical supervision, just take a moment, think about the theory that you use. What's there that helps with these conversations? Maybe is there something missing where you need to borrow from another theory? So it's something to keep in mind. I realize these pauses are probably a little shorter than if I were in a class, but hopefully they just build on one another, and you can keep this question in mind as well. Can you run your theory through a filter and see if there are blind spots that you would have, that you would need to recognize?